Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel on future legal challenges and opportunities in the legal profession. My name is Su Hongyang, and I am co-chair of the ASO New Professionals Interest Group. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the world in many aspects. We have seen changes in the international legal work. Today, we are going to focus more on the road ahead and beyond, looking at hot topics and new opportunities in the legal profession with our four excellent speakers. First, please allow me to briefly introduce our speakers. Ms. Chandra Navarro is a partner with Hogan Lovells, based in Washington, D.C. For over 25 years now, she has provided advice to companies, trade associations, and governments regarding important customs matters, free trade agreements, trade preference programs, and import compliance. Mr. Mauricio Duante is Chief Operating Officer of A2J Tech, a company in Denver, Colorado that builds legal tech solutions to improve access to justice. Besides, Mauricio serves as an off-counsel partner of Legal Plus, a law firm focused on advising entrepreneurs and technology companies. Mr. Marcus Bayham is assistant professor at University of Passau, Germany, and an adjunct lecturer in international law at the University of Vienna, Austria. Marcus has acted in cases before ICSID, ICC, DIS, and ad hoc tribunals, as well as before the Australian Supreme Court. Most recently, he launched and serves as editor of the German language law journal Sustainable Law. Mr. Kabir Jungo is Senior International Arbitration Advisor at the Office of Arnold and Porter in New York and a lecturer in law at Columbia Law School. Based in New York, he focuses his practice on international investment arbitration, international commercial arbitration, and public international law matters, serving both as counsel and arbitrator. He is currently pursuing his second doctoral degree from Harvard. And now, let's welcome our first speaker, Ms. Chandra Navarro. Chandra, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Su Hong, and thank you for having me here speaking today. As an international trade lawyer, what we deal with normally is the trade in goods and services across international borders. So all matters relating to how goods are imported and exported, and what are the ways that companies can benefit from international trade agreements, and the myriad of rules and regulations that apply to the importation of goods. If it's a food product, food regulations, a pharmaceutical good, Ministry of Health or FDA type of regulations. So that's my general practice area. Certainly over the last year, under pandemic, environment, things have been quite different. First of all, we saw a significant interest in companies in supply chain issues as factories began to close in China. When the pandemic first hit, this threw off all sorts of supply chains that really relied on China for production. And then the domino effect of the various different countries that supply products to world markets, and certainly the United States, became a huge issue for companies trying to figure out how to move production, switch supply chains. So we were quite busy in helping companies try to think about these supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic. It then moved to how to help companies in countries where the governments had closed down factories and were certain factories and production sites considered necessary and could continue to run, and the rules shifted, from one day to the next as to who was considered sort of an indispensable employee and not, and who could retain their factories open or not. And so it was really sort of drinking from the fire hose and dealing with the Wild West. And then in the middle of the sort of the heat of the pandemic, we began dealing with PPE. Everything was PPE. I didn't even know the term before that, right? We all know what PPE is now. And so it was, how do you find masks and gowns and all sorts of other medical equipment? And so it wasn't just our pharmaceutical and medical device clients who were looking for PPE, which was all being really sourced in China, which had either closed down or employees were closed down, or the shipping lines were shut down. But then factories and suppliers and retailers all over the world then required PPE just to be able to start up again, right? People who work in a retail store needed a mask. And so finding and the sourcing and supply chains and how do you get that product in, and the international trade issues related to PPE. At the same time, our then President Trump was causing us significant nightmares with all sorts of trade wars, including a trade war with China, which meant that this PPE that was only found in China now was subject to additional duties, subject to what was called Section 301 duties. And so not only could we not find them anywhere else, but now we had a trade war with China where we had to pay additional duties if we could get them in. And then countries started hoarding PPE and not letting PPE be exported because they needed it for their own countries. And so it was really a Wild West of trying to find and source PPE. I helped get a New England Patriots, a professional football team jet, to land in China to pick up PPE, to land it in the United States, to deliver it to hospitals in New York that were under extreme threat of not having sufficient PPE. And so you think about what's required. There's tariff classification and customs duties related to that PPE. There's the FDA regulation on the PPE. All of these things have changed. And meanwhile, what was happening internally was we are working from home, right? So there's all of these people are trying to move from what's a normal legal environment in big offices with all sorts of help to working from home. And so it's been an incredibly complex year for us in the international trade space. I, for one, am very happy that we now have a more sane president in President Biden, that I don't have to look at the Twitter feed at 4 a.m. for a new regulation. I mean, I was in Germany attending a conference in August, a year and a half ago, when he tweeted it. President Trump tweeted at 4 a.m. that he was imposing 5% duties on all imports from Mexico, just overnight. And so you can imagine what that causes, the disruption that causes in the markets and the supply chain. And that was before the pandemic. So it's a fascinating space to work in. I've been doing this for over 25 years, as Suhong said, and it's ever changing. I think one of the things that I have seen in working under, sort of post, March of the pandemic, is how much more difficult it has been for women in particular who are working from home, taking care of children. Children are studying online. I think men have, that maybe were not as involved in the care of children have seen how difficult it is to be a professional, an attorney, and be caring for children. So I think it's mostly our younger lawyers who really need the space, who are looking forward to being back in an office. I think in the United States, attorneys that are minorities and of color are even more impacted than most because of where we come from and what the home situations are for a lot of attorneys of color, and younger attorneys, because those of us who've been around for a while, we've had years to develop our practices and meet people and be able to form alliances. For younger lawyers, where you really benefit from attending meetings and getting to know people and making connections and attending lunches and this kind of thing. So they've really been set back almost a year. I mean, as much as all of these Zoom meetings are great, it does not offer the same kind of personal connection that you meet at the coffee machine or at a bar luncheon. And so, I think those are some of the things, the changes that I have seen, both positive and negative. I think there's been also an opportunity in via Zoom, frankly, to make more personal connections just by seeing someone. You see my face, you hear me, you sort of make a better connection than you do on a telephone conference. And so certainly the world of international trade law is fascinating. It's ever changing. Every time we have a new administration, we see a significant change. Certainly this one is cause for a little bit of celebration. So, that I think gives you a quick review of where things stand in my practice area.
Thank you, Chandra, for sharing your views on supply chain issues, PPE, trade war, as well as, thank you for understanding the difficulty faced by minority lawyers and younger lawyers. Our next speaker would be Mr. Mauricio Duante. Mauricio, do you want to start?
Yes, and thank you. And Chandra, compared to my colleagues on this panel, I've shied away from the traditional, let's say, legal service or attorney. I used to practice arbitration back in the day in energy infrastructures and software disputes. I was more in the commercial side rather than investment side. But I would say nowadays I focus more on the actual tangible technology projects, services, and solutions with A2J Tech. And we have a very, let's say, mission-focused company and organization. It's, again, a technology startup, but we focus on creating impactful solutions for access to justice. And access to justice is not only access to courts, but it goes, how can we provide affordable legal services to underrepresented communities? How can we create more free solutions, especially during COVID? And I'm going to speak a bit about that. So again, I've probably been a different type of attorney, but I guess as we become more in a technology era, we're going to see a trend that more attorneys are going to start specializing more in technology. So now let's get basically with the premise or the question that is how COVID-19 has impacted let's say the technology and digital innovation landscape on the legal industry. First, before speaking, I like to focus on three main players. First, with COVID-19, the first thing that happened, at least to all attorneys that are practitioners on litigation or arbitration, notice the first thing that happened that courts came to a halt. Some arbitration chambers starting suspending their audiences or saying, look, right now we don't have the infrastructure to keep going with our, let's say, hearings or even evidence and exchanges of evidence, and sometimes even going to arguments about the execution of an award. Again, courts came to a halt as well as arbitration. And because we have a practitioner arbitration, I'm going to be talking a bit about that. So what happened? Courts were scrambling through, trying to react, to implement solutions. So that was the first impact that we, let's say, saw. The courts didn't have a digital infrastructure to respond to COVID-19. Then what happened, again, the same effect, just in a different, let's say, connotation, happened with the legal industry players. And when I talk about legal industry players, I refer to attorneys, law firms, legal aides, that at the same time, no one expected a worldwide pandemic. And in fact, I would say probably 98% of the world was blown away when the Health Organization declared a global pandemic. No one was ready on a digital level or on a digital infrastructure level to start, let's say, reacting to those changes. And the third, let's say, big player during COVID-19 was law schools and schools. But I will focus more on the legal industry. So what happened, again, being on the reaction side, because no one was prepared about this, courts starting to implement virtual courts or virtual hearings. So probably you saw a bunch of examples, and probably now the famous cat filter on Zoom on the recent Texas hearing is an after effect of the implementation of virtual hearings or virtual courts. So we saw, let's say, a rise on the implementation of WebEx or Zoom or Google Meet and case management system on a court level, both in a state level and a federal level in the US. And on, let's say, global scale, we saw probably more judicial courts starting to implement certain aspects of technology. However, those efforts were not enough, or at least we've been noticing that they're not enough to keep a sustainable digital infrastructure in the medium to long term. But that was one of the main struggles, and I do really applaud that there was a lot of efforts and a lot of courts that not only focus on the short-term solution about implementing technology, but they came to the table and actually had discussions on how can we make this digital infrastructure and this digital transformation sustainable in the medium and long term. Because again, if courts become more technologically savvy or have more of a open digital infrastructure, that is going to enhance access to justice. We know, and probably around the world, this is not only a problem of one country. I'm originally from Guatemala, and I know it's not the only country that judicial courts take a long time to resolve certain types of disputes. I remember, probably is a quick story, when I was in arbitration, just to get the execution of an award, it took over 4 years, which probably defeats the purpose of the New York Convention. If you're going to execute an award in 4 years, it's probably best to just have it on your desk and be happy about the result. But again, courts, many of the courts and also arbitration centers, for instance, that we worked closely with some of them, implemented digital solutions. However, the real challenge remains: what happens after COVID-19? Are we going to still have the initiative to keep promoting technology solutions? So that is with the courts. Now, with the legal industry or the legal industry players that I was referring to, that we can talk about law firms, solo practitioners, and legal aid organizations, they did the same. They started to adopt technology. However, here's a negative side that I always talk, is that I feel that during COVID-19, we got a fatigue and oversaturation of technology. That means, and being, let's say, in an honest and transparent manner, sometimes many attorneys think that putting technology or implementing technology is going to solve many of the problems. In fact, that was my notion before actually seeing the complexities of implementing some technology solutions. So I thought, no, with technology, we're going to be good, we're going to be great, we're going to be efficient. But what happens? Sometimes, if you could be a solo practitioner, or you could be at a big multinational law firm, if you have certain issues in your processes that you haven't, let's say, figured out or enhanced, if you put technology on top of that, it's just going to make things worse. So some law firms and some solo practitioners thought that because of COVID, they needed to implement technology. But before implementing technology, the important aspect is change some of the root components of your business model or in your practice that is going to make it compatible to have a digital infrastructure. So again, it's not only saying, okay, associates or paralegals that were coming in the office, good luck, we'll see you tomorrow on Google Meets. But you have to create certain standards and procedures to make that digital transition. That is not easy. It's not easy overnight. It takes time, and it takes some practices and cultural, in some aspects, cultural appropriations from law firms implementing and showing what are the best practices to move to a remote environment. And the third one, on education level, and here I see both positive and negative sides, is that at least many law schools started to envision that attorneys are technology savvy. That even though that premise that I was brought up, that the technology and attorneys are not friends, like math and attorneys are not friends, I think that is a myth and a fiction, that as we, let's say, begin with more complex times in which attorneys are not only, let's say, legal services providers, but they have to wear many different hats. They have to understand financials, they have to understand business models, they have to have additional set of skills that are not taught in law schools. Many of the law schools that I know of, that I've been in contact with, started to notice our curriculum on most of law schools is coming short. We need to show and start teaching additional skills that is not only reading case laws or interpreting statutes or drafting pleadings or contracts, but we have to show additional skills. And those are famous soft skills, but not only soft skills, but business skills. How can you network it? And again, how can you network in a virtual environment? How can you do that? So now law schools started noticing that they have to change how they've been teaching. And on the negative side, I've seen that many of the law schools have not necessarily reacted in a positive way of saying everything is digital now. So that means that they have some limitations on the things that they can do. In fact, I know some universities, at least in Latin America, that have suspended certain type of classes and certain type of activities because they didn't have, let's say, the elements or the tools. Again, the technology could help to give those classes. But again, I don't want to say only positive and negative. I want to give, let's say, the honest assessment of my learnings through COVID-19. However, I think, and overall, and just wrapping up because I don't want to extend too much and I don't want to get the panel bored with this, is that I think COVID-19 at the end of the day, when we look into retrospective, we're going to say it was a pivotal moment in the legal industry in which we started to notice that many things have to start to change. It is not only regulations or is how we treat our client, but it's also how we have a relationship with technology. Again, and this is at least to my opinion, is a myth on saying technology is going to replace attorneys or the next AI robot is going to replace arbitrators. So we're going to have now automatic awards. And when you look at it on the actual technology side, you got to say no. Technology is going to be a tool. You can use it for good or for bad, but at least for attorneys, technology is going to be a tool that is going to leverage their services, that is going to leverage their efficiency, and hopefully provide an even better service that they have been providing so far. So again, I cannot just say AI is going to replace all of us because again, I'm still an attorney. I still have a practice in startups and venture capital. So I cannot say we're going to disappear because again, we have human skills. And at the end of the day, the legal industry and the legal profession remains a human profession. At the end of the day, you have to have empathy. You got to understand your clients. You got to see other aspects that the simple technology, at least for right now, and I will probably say for the next 20 years and 25 years even, and I probably say even after I'm gone of this world, probably technology is not going to be able to meet us on the emotional level or on the human qualities. So again, COVID-19 is just a pivotal moment in time that is gonna teach us how the legal industry can be innovative as well. And again, innovation is not only using technology, but it's creating different business models, different alternatives for our clients. So that is the important, lesson for me from COVID-19 is be open to innovation, not necessarily to technology, because many people conflate the two terms, but it's innovation. Think about different aspects that you can innovate. If you're a solo practitioner, if you're at a law firm, if you're at a law school, just think about different ideas that can start breaching the gap on the legal industry and the new trends on the world. So I would say that is for me, and thank you again for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mauricio. Yes, the COVID-19 has called for a strong need for the digital infrastructure and transformation. Yeah, I think it really takes time for harmonizing the development of technology and how we can use technology as a tool to improve the legal work. And now I would like to invite Mr. Marcus Mayhem to start his presentation.
Thank you, Suhong. First, let me begin by thanking ASIL for the super professional organization of this online event. I have to say the technical preparation was really quite impressive in relation to what I've been used to this last year. And well, now we'll see whether that shows its effect on my performance. Also, I very much appreciate, of course, the invitation by the new professional interest group, of which I myself am also still a member and have, in fact, been the newsletter editor for just about the last 2 years now, to be featured in this very distinguished panel and talk about a research project close to my heart and that's kept me pretty much occupied for just over the last year now. Now that we've already covered two of the major global developments in the legal setting, I want to use the opportunity in reflecting on future challenges and opportunities in the legal profession to talk about the idea of sustainable law and legal sustainability, as I'll call it. I'll use the next 10 minutes or so to briefly pick up where we currently stand in the conversation on sustainable development before looking at states as what I will call sustainability laboratories, and finally laying out a blueprint for the normative project of sustainable law or legal sustainability. The term sustainability has become part of our daily language. Its meaning ranges from the longevity of measures to concrete environmental policy objectives, such as the careful use of resources, combating climate change, reducing energy consumption, or CO2 neutral production. In German, the term was first used scientifically as early as 1713 by Karl von Karlowitz, who advocated responsible forestry as an antithesis to the overexploitation of forests aimed at short-term profit. To this end, he formulated the principle of sustainable use. Internationally, the term entered discussions through reference to the maximum sustainable yield of fish stocks even before the first Law of the Sea Conference of 1956. Today, of course, the term sustainability is much broader in its international dimension and encompasses the complex interrelationships between environmental protection and global economic development in the balance of the three-pillar model of ecology, economy, and social issues. In the work of the United Nations, the term sustainability or sustainable development has pretty much shaped the framework of multilateral discussion for over 30 years now, culminating in the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals contained therein set concrete targets for sustainable global development. However, these goals are to be understood merely as intermediate targets and part of a long-term and inclusive transformation of the global economy as already visible in the preamble of the 2030 Agenda. Quote, "We're determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind." Unquote. At the European level, we now find even more ambitious propositions. The European Union's recent legislation sets strict targets, for example, in the area of sustainable procurement. With its Green Deal, the Union is making a commitment to sustainable circular economy with the goal of a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. This will require little less than a total reorientation of the economy, away from consumer society towards a more circular economy. Ursula von der Leyen compared the required effort to the US program for the first moon landing, coining the now often quoted statement that the European Green Deal is little less than Europe's man on the moon moment. The EU's recent legislation illustrates the seriousness of the undertaking and quenches any claims that these commitments may constitute mere lip service. For example, the European climate law currently in consideration covers all relevant economic sectors: transport, energy, agriculture, buildings, etc., and even goes beyond the CO2 reduction target for 2030 set out in the Green Deal. The Union's governance regulation seeks to accompany and guide this process as a whole. These developments at the European level provide the first tangible indications of the changes to be expected within member states of the Union, which brings me to my second point, moving now from the international to the domestic. Already today, states can be viewed as sustainability laboratories in various policy areas. To take my own home state, Austria, not Australia, by the way, although I wish I had acted before the High Court of Australia in my professional career, the Austrian government has placed a specific focus on sustainability in its program of work, where this term is mentioned more than 100 times and forms the foundation of all policy pillars. Austria set itself an even more ambitious goal than the European Union: climate neutrality by 2040. The US, under the Biden administration, is now again committed to re-entering the fight against climate change. We are yet to see how this new engagement evolves and engulfs the various layers of federal and state legislation and executive branches. But such impetus is already being followed by responses from the business community. The green economy serves as a guiding principle, linking a company's economic success to the linkage between ecology and economy. And this brings me to this normative project of legal sustainability. Until now, sustainability and sustainable development have pretty much been the focus of research for international lawyers, environmental activists, and domestic regulatory lawyers, of course. However, achieving the SDGs by 2030 will require an effort that goes beyond these traditional champions of the sustainability agenda. The idea of sustainable law envisions a holistic conception of the law as an instrument for the implementation of political goals. While environmental, energy, and public procurement law will, of course, continue to be central for the implementation of the SDGs, it would be too short-sighted to limit oneself to those areas alone. The growing phenomenon of climate lawsuits impressively demonstrates how general tort law guides the outcome of proceedings through questions of causality. In corporate law, the character of an economic order is already determined, in addition to substantive issues such as corporate social responsibility, by the creation of formal order through control and transparency mechanisms, such as audits. European or international global banking and financial market law has been dealing with the growing need for green and sustainable financial products for quite some time now. While tax law clearly stands available as the steering instrument for any form of governance, criminal law as the ultimate expression of social opprobrium arguably delineates the field. In order to implement the SDGs, the law can and will only develop its full effect by breaking out of the traditional roles and making use of the entire legal toolbox across the board. It's no longer sufficient to delimit the law along its individual areas between public law and private law on the other side. Rather, it must be conceived as legal sustainability. The implementation of the SDGs is already happening on a vertical trajectory across international law, European law, and domestic law. The normative project of sustainable law or legal sustainability seeks to extend this trajectory horizontally across all areas of law. Academia and practice, and this is my proposition, will have to reconceptualize their field and adapt to the increasing expectation that their solutions ensure legal sustainability. Sustainability ensured through the mechanisms of the law, constituting both a future challenge and a very huge opportunity for the legal profession, particularly for us new legal professionals. Creative minds will succeed. That will conclude my input to today's panel, and I very much look forward to the further discussions and questions.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm glad that efforts have been made at international, regional, and domestic levels for the sustainability in law, and we look forward to the new opportunities related to SDGs in law in the future. Now I would like to invite our last speaker, Mr. Kabir Dugo, to start his presentation.
Thank you, Suhong. Very grateful. Delighted to be here with you. I mean, I think I speak on behalf of everybody that we would be happier if we were in person. But putting that reality aside, this is probably the best we have, so we will make the most of it. Let me also echo my thanks to ASIL, as somebody who has spoken a fair bit, and you have to go to events, no idea about what's going to happen. This seems fairly well put together and organized. So let me start off by acknowledging everything that the prior speakers have said. My presentation is going to more or less talk about what does the future hold. I think Suhong's description to me was, tell us what happens day after tomorrow, which I loved, because we're assuming we're going to try to proverbially get our shit together tomorrow. So once things have settled down, where do we go? It's always good for us to have temporal markers. So I'm going to give us a new temporal marker, BC. Now, I'm not talking of the historical BC. Let us understand BC as the time before COVID, right? How did our profession operate? Now, I'm going to speak about this from an arbitration lens. A lot of what I'm speaking would apply to the law at large. A lot of what Chandri was speaking, about trade, I was, looking in agreement. You will see some common features across practice groups. So in our practice, there was a lot of travel. We lived in the airplane. I can see Chandri nodding in agreement, right? That was one reality. Now, from a sustainability perspective, getting to Marcus's presentation, right? We think about the carbon footprint, we think about the reality of travel, and we think about how you did business, right? Chandri spoke about the fact that we are probably losing something when everything is virtual, right? Many people are watching this and probably doing something else, likely in your PJs. Look down and look to your screen and confirm to yourself whether I'm right or wrong, right? But that's the reality of how we used to do things. You actually went to where you had to do business. The related practice we had in arbitration, but I think it's true more generally, is we relied on paper. As you can see, my wall of shame, right? We believed, again, from a sustainability perspective, our way of doing things was hard physical copies, right? So that became another component of the way we did things. In litigation arbitration, there's a lot of motions practice. And every time you bring a motions practice, right, there's going to be a longer time frame added to the dispute or the resolution of the dispute, because this takes time, right? Resolving the motion that you're bringing before the deciding authority, right? This is how we did things. What has COVID forced us to do? This gets to what Mauricio was talking about. We have decided that technology can help us do some of what we were doing remotely/virtually, right? And we're seeing, as Mauricio spoke, of the growth of virtual hearings, the growth of virtual dispute resolution. Now, the cat story is, is an interesting one, but it brings home the point that we're having justice move to an online platform, right? I recall also reading, I think 2 days ago, right? You had this traffic violation, and a person, one of the people appearing before the judge, were actually in a surgery room, and the judge actually had to time out, folks. We're not going to have you operate on somebody and sit at a judicial proceeding. But let's just reflect on this reality that things have moved online. And let me now come to your immediate question, Suhong. Where are we going day after tomorrow? And we don't know the future, but let's try and hypothesize a few different things we should think about as people entering into the practice in the early stages of practice. We're going to likely see some form of virtual hearing exist in the future. What form will it take? We yet don't know, right? But the need for having everything happen in person is going to be much harder to justify. Now, I'm going to make a very broad generalization here. Generally, younger people are better with technology. Embrace that. This is an opportunity to shine, right? So if you're looking at opportunities, get familiar with platforms, get familiar with features, embrace brilliant ideas like Mauricio and his company are working on when it comes to technology, because that is going to give us a new opportunity, a new area for growth. That's one area. The second, this is more a meta question that we need to think about our practice. And this is something Chandri spoke about, and that is the question of diversity, right? We need to be thinking long and hard about how this new virtual reality can help/hurt our overall goal of increasing diversity for women, for people of color, for intersectional people, right? When you have more than one attribute to diversity, and thinking about categories we sometimes don't think about. What about linguistic minorities? They are often ignored. Think about that, right? How can we ensure that at a virtual hearing, at a virtual avenue, the same rules and expectations of having people reflecting the world that we are in exist? That's another area we need to think long and hard about. Oops. The third area we may want to think about will be the impact on the environment, right? Uh, it is easy for us to acknowledge that, when we are doing hearings online, we're not on a plane and we're saving the world, no carbon footprint. While electricity has a carbon footprint, sending emails has a carbon footprint. So again, we need to be thinking relative to what we are doing. How can we reduce our carbon footprint? How can we make our practice more sustainable? And the final point, this I'm not going to get into any detail, but I just want to flag it because it is going to be a big aspect of dispute resolution. Force majeure, impossibility, and all those related defenses claims. We have known that these are going to exist as a consequence of COVID. A lot of countries have put companies, have put entities on life support, right? You're seeing bailouts, you're seeing, a little bit of pause on the natural course of business to try and make sure people are able to get out of COVID fine. But there is going to be a stage when this support will stop. And as life starts resuming towards normality, we are going to start seeing the COVID claims in relation to force majeure, in relation to impossibility, in terms of supervening impossibility, all these arguments coming up. As young lawyers, get your hands dirty, so to speak, with these areas, because that'll be a big part of what you are likely going to be doing for the first few years of your career. Overall, we are a resilient group. As lawyers, in some senses, we are privileged. There's a lot of global suffering. In some senses, we are shielded from the absolute misery that is affecting a lot of people around us. Let's embrace the opportunity and try to make things better for everybody all around. And I'll stop here, passing it back to you, Suhong.
Thank you, Kabir, for connecting all the speakers' presentation as well as providing insights and suggestions on the opportunities into the future. Before I ask some questions to our panelists, does anyone want to quickly respond to or comment on others' part?
I just wanted to say that Kabir has made a compelling argument about why my election as an attorney to law school was a wise decision, because there was a moment in which I was regretting it. But I'm glad Kabir ended with those words. So thank you again for inspiring me and motivating me to still call myself an attorney.
Absolutely, I agree that I felt very, very fortunate to be an attorney, that I could have the luxury of being able to work from home when so many others, have not been able to. And I also agree that especially here in the United States after the George Floyd incident and sort of the rising awareness of the importance of diversity, that this particular time, as I said in my speech, is particularly more difficult on people of color and women. And but I think there has been sort of this rising awareness and an effort to try to do more. So I also say to the younger generations, use the fact that companies are forcing law firms to be more diverse. Use that to achieve a success. in law firms and in legal practices within in-house counsel. Use that to your advantage, because it's important, and we need to see more lawyers. There's something like 20% of the population is Hispanic, and we have, I think, in the United States, less than 5% Hispanic attorneys. And I know most of my practice in DC, I was the only native Spanish-speaking trade lawyer for a very long time. So absolutely, use that right now to your advantage.
Thank you, Chandra. Since you are here, I just want to ask questions starting from you. So which opportunities do you see coming with the new optimism surrounding the WTO?
Well, I mean, first we have what's going to happen in the United States with regard to the WTO, right? Because during the 4 years of the Trump administration, he had basically pulled out of many multilateral agreements. He pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Agreement, almost pulled the United States, or in many senses did, right? Pull us out of the World Trade Organization, left it sort of in paralyzed fashion. So I think there's opportunities now in the Biden administration to move forward with opening of the United States within the WTO, of the U.S. sort of reaching out to its trading partners. I think part of what Kabir said also, in terms of it's not just force majeure clauses, but as countries subsidize their industries, as companies try to survive, that means they can try some practices that can be considered unfair trading practices. So there will be, in my view, an increase in anti-dumping cases and countervailing duty cases. When markets are in this sort of protectionist attitude, where the U.S. is, well, it used to be, for years, whether led by a Democrat or a Republican, had been very pro-free trade, right? We had it my entire career, all sorts of free trade agreements being signed and implemented, and all of a sudden it sort of ground to a halt under the Trump administration. And Democrats aren't known for being super free traders anyway, but now under COVID, right, in an economic crisis, what many in the United States as well as other countries start to look at is look internally, right? How do we protect our own markets? How do we, Biden has announced Buy America rules to try to keep everything domestic, realizing that, oh my God, all our PPE was being made in China. All of our drugs are being made in India or China. What do we do? So I think there's going to be an increase in international trade cases and disputes going forward because of this desire to protect home markets.
Thank you, Chandra. Mauricio, I want to ask you, at the digital age, we see many new products appearing which aim to assist lawyers in improving their working efficiency. How do we smoothly guarantee the consistency of work when we use different technology products, or we transfer from an old one to a new substitute?
And here it's probably a call to action to some attorneys. And again, technology is a new industry that is starting to get more relevant. And every year we're going to start having attorneys specialized in blockchain regulation, or attorneys specialized in artificial intelligence and ethics compliance. We're going to start looking at new areas of practice in the legal industry. However, if we want to have good tools as practitioners and as attorneys, there's where attorneys play a pivotal role of becoming an active participant in the technology industry. Sometimes we think that there's the big technology providers or the technology startups, and they should develop on their own their products or technology solutions that are going to be tools for attorneys. But that's when I see a lot of opportunity for many attorneys and say, no, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that building of products, of new solutions that we can then offer to practitioners, law firms, so practitioners, and understand their pain points, see how we can help them even more. Because sometimes when never building a product or a solution, and here comes a a human-centered design approach and what we call legal design thinking is sometimes we build a product or solution standing 100 meters away. But if we go to where the problem is, to how we can help, that's where we get more sustainable products and solutions that attorneys are going to feel comfortable. If an attorney is on the back end, let's say helping developers and showcasing feedback and telling them how we can improve or the additional struggles of, let's say, a case management system, why it doesn't work for them or is too complex. If attorneys start to get a proactive approach on the technology industry, we're going to see better tools, better solutions, and that is going to help to the mainstream adoption of technologies while increasing efficiency to attorneys in general. So I would say that is my perspective on that.
I'm in too. I think that one thing that this pandemic has forced governments to accept some technology, right? Because previously we had, with the U.S. Customs Service, with the U.S. Department of Commerce, with U.S. Trade Representative, these agencies, we had to file paper documents. We had to file, sometimes they required 10 copies. And oh my God, to be able to send something via email now is just, that's fabulous. Having a hearing with, U.S. Customs to do it online, it's fabulous. So it's definitely pushed governments, right, to do this, not just law firms, Mauricio.
Thank you, Mauricio and Chandra. And Marcus, could you please provide some examples of legal sustainability in practice?
Thank you, Sehong. I mean, ultimately, what legal sustainability or sustainable law is about, as I try to portray it as a normative project, is simply conceiving law holistically. Now, to take one example that I already mentioned, public procurement, you'd actually be surprised that the ability to take into consideration social factors relating to the achievement of the SDGs, for example, is not really self-evident in most domestic procurement legislations. In European law, a big focus, for example, is on the resilience of legal provisions now, right? So this would be going in the direction of legal sustainability or sustainable law. Listening to what Chandra said about trade law, I mean, one might simply wonder how to implement more stability into the system to not lead to the discussion along, do we have a Trump or do we have a Biden administration that we want to be looking at? Do we have Republicans or Democrats? Or is there a way to conceive the law in a fashion that will simply bring more resilience to the table? And listening also to Mauricio was a big breakthrough, again, in my home state of Austria, to have the Supreme Court acknowledge the possibility of holding procedures online. Chandra also just mentioned, still procedural codes are riddled with writing and physical registration requirements and submission requirements and so on and so forth. So as Kabir mentioned, the carbon footprint we're leaving by not flying to DC, but holding this panel online. Ultimately, I think legal sustainability will very much simply require a larger, more holistic impact assessment in legislation and where we move with the law. And I think that will be a very, very big opportunity for lawyers to engage in and to become active creatively in implementing these different aspects and take them into consideration.
Thank you, Marcus and Kabir. I know that you are a founder of the Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers. Do you believe that the digital transformation will make the legal process more inclusive and diverse?
That's a hard question. My short answer probably is not going to sound as encouraging as one would like it to be. But I think the digital revolution in and of itself is not going to impact either the quest for gender equality or racial equality. I don't think so. Can the digital platform facilitate? I think yes. Yes. You can, in terms of access of justice, more people can have a voice without having to travel. But the digital revolution is neutral. I think the quest for gender equality or racial equality is one that requires conscious thinking. It requires the next generation to always be evaluating at any stage in your career. Am I making sure that people that are working on a matter represent the society that we are in? It needs us to be more active in the way we do things. I mean, Chandri was talking about the fact that she was the only native Spanish speaker for her career. That is unacceptable, right? That is not a good reality. I hate to say, I don't think things have changed radically that much, even to date. So this is, we're putting a lot of pressure on the younger generation, right? COVID is screwing people up. The lack of job opportunities is screwing people up. But the quest for gender and racial equality also falls on your shoulder. The good thing is y'all are a smarter, more aware generation, and hopefully y'all will be able to embrace it better than we did. Kabir out.
Yeah, that's really tough. Okay, now I have one last general question for all. It seems the COVID-19 pandemic has brought some special challenges and opportunities to the legal profession at this point. And in the long run, we need to think about how technology and innovation will impact legal work and how we can develop the legal profession in a more sustainable way. So when we sense there might be new opportunities in the legal profession, what would you advise new professionals to prepare if they want to be a part of these developments?
I'm happy to jump in. So I definitely think that for young professionals today, as we mentioned, I mean, I know my daughters have taught me how to, new tricks on the iPhone, and when I have issues on my laptop, I turn to my kids. So you have the ability. It's second nature to you. So use it, and that I think provides certainly some opportunity. I also think that, frankly, the Zoom platform and similar platforms allow folks to travel, if you will, without without the burden that it was as a young professional for me, especially when I had young children at home. I logged a lot of miles on aircraft. And it is not just the time traveling; it's planning, it's the arranging with the babysitter and figuring out the food, and for the kids, and so not having to do that while you lose that that excitement of being in a foreign location or and traveling and seeing new places. I'd say use the communication ways of going and traveling and being with clients and other people that are now offered via Zoom that don't create these other burdens on young folks with young families.
Yeah, and I would say when I was in law school in Guatemala, I read a book that it was called The 10 Commandments of an Attorney. And probably the number one commandment of that book was keep learning. And I would say if you want to start in technology and innovation, always keep learning, keep studying. You can take now Udemy courses or EDX courses in technology, or you can learn something else. I remember I was in arbitration. I had, let's say, books and everything else, and I had to learn to start in arbitration. But when I was transitioning in technology, I was never taught in law school, this is technology, this is how it is used, or this is innovation. It came by learning, like buying books. Sometimes I understood most of it. Sometimes I didn't understand like 20% of the book. So again, it's always keep learning, always be at the upfront of your learning, and it's probably the best investment that you can make. That is the lesson that I was rescued from my dad, is that the best investment I can do for you is in your education. And you have to respect that investment, and you have to keep investing in your education. So if you want to become on technology innovation, I know sometimes it sounds like science fiction. It just requires some education, some reading sometimes, and getting outside your comfort zone. But I would say that is my recommendation.
Okay.
That's also to echo my previous appeal with maybe even more optimism. I think creativity comes more easy while you're still at a formative stage. So don't be afraid to question what you learn at law school, draw analogies from one area to another, or combine your way of thinking about the law cross-sectionally with any other interests or ideas you simply come across, and experiment with that. And I think good things can come from that.
I think that energy, right? That energy that comes in with not having been sort of told no as many times as we have. You bring that energy to the practice and to your companies or your firms, and make sure you ask those questions in the sustainability, and I think that the mindset of younger people is that's much more relevant, and that's what's pushing the change and sort of corporate social responsibility. Why is this becoming a big deal, and why are laws being passed? Because this is important to people, and people are willing to take a stand.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we are now perfectly on time, and why not let's just continue to interact with our audience in the continued conversation room. Thank you very much for participating.